Before I tell you what happened, let me just say this. I never expected a night like that to change how I looked at everything. One storm, one stuck car, and one moment I still can't quite forget. What my nephew said, it stayed with me ever since. Tell me, where are you watching this from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach down now. Let me take you back to the night everything shifted. It started with a phone call just after dinner. I just sat down with a cup of chamomile tea, feet up, book in hand. No, the usual quiet. Evening I've Cometto treasure at 5-9. My sister Martha called, a bit frazzled as always, asking if I could give Richard a lift from the train station. His car had broken down on the way to a cabin he'd rented upstate with some friends. They'd all gone ahead and Hugh was stuck. Richard, my nephew, but honestly more like a distant cousin in how we'd always interacted. Kay was a Martha's only child, about 30 or so now. Kay and I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years. We'd always been polite, warm even, but never especially close. Still, I had no reason to say no. It was only a 4 or 5 minute drive. Sue grabbed my coat, tossed on some lipstick, and headed out. The weather had been threatening all day. Low-hanging clouds wind that hummed at the windows by the time I reached the station. For train drops were pounding the windshield like little fists. Richard stood beneath dim yellow light, hood up, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked littler than I remembered. Brought her too, but the smile was the same. Charming, half sheepish. Thanks for coming out, Aunt Susan Hest. Climbing. In his voice was deep earthen. I remembered. Didn't mean to ruin your evening. Oh, please, I replied, glancing over at him. I was halfway through a mystery novel, falling asleep. This is probably more exciting. We both laughed. The roads were already slick, the storm getting worse by the minute. Lightning snapped across the sky like it was tearing something open. Thunder followed fast behind. We were barely 10 minutes into the drive when downpour became something else. A deluge, a wall of water that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I think we should pull over. I sighed, knuckles white on the wheel. This is getting dangerous. Richard nodded. There's a rest stop up ahead. I think might be the safest bet that we found it. A tiny patch of gravel next to a closed diner and an old maintenance. The rain was deafening. I parked under a sad little awning and turned off the engine. The windows fogged quickly with our breath and the dampness. Well, I said with a sigh, looks like we're here for a while. Richard reclined his seat slightly and looked over at me, smiling. Guests were stuck together for the night. We chuckled again, but it was awkward now. Not uncomfortable exactly, but aware. It was a strange sort of closeness, the kind you don't plan for. A shared space in a car where everything feels too quiet, even with the storm raging outside. I noticed then how grown really was. Not the boy who used toxic soccer balls in Martha's backyard, but a man with sharp features, kind eyes, a calmness that I didn't remember from before. I always thought you were the cool hunt, he said, breaking the silence after a while. You never hovered, always gave space. I glanced at him. It's one way to say, I didn't meddle. No, I mean it. He said earnestly, even when things were rough with Mom. You were the only one who didn't make me feel like a screw-up. His voice softened, like he wasn't just sticking about the weather anymore. I appreciate that, Susan, the way he saw an Amy name. Not Aunt Susan, but just Susan. It stirred something. Not inappropriate, not wrong. Just unexpected. I always thought you had this mysterious grace about you, he added almost under his breath. I didn't respond right away. The air inside the car felt warmer suddenly, not from heat, but something goals. Shifted slightly, aware of the neckline of my blouse, the way his eyes lingered for just a moment too long. You're being very flattering tonight, I said, trying to laugh it off. Hal looked at me with that same smile, on the gentler now. I'm just being honest. There was a long pause. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside a car, everything was still. My heart beat a little faster, not in fear, but surprise. I hadn't felt noticed like that in years. Really seen? He leaned back, folding his hands behind his head, eyes toward the ceiling. You ever feel like one night can change how you see everything? He asked quietly. I swallowed. Sometimes, yes. But most of the time, I think we only realize it looking back. He didn't say anything for a moment. Just nodded slowly. Then he turned to me again. His expression unreadable. You're beautiful. You know, he said softly, not just for your age, just beautiful. I turned to look out the window, hiding a blush I hadn't felt in decades. Richard, I know, he said quickly. I'm not trying to make things weird. I'm just saying what's true. You don't hear it enough? I can tell. His words settled between us like a blanket. Warm, heavy, comforting. We didn't touch. We didn't cross any lines. But something shifted in that moment. An unspoken understanding. A crack in the walls. We both kept up. The hours passed slowly. We talked more about family regrets, loneliness, dreams we still hadn't chased. Somewhere near midnight, the rain finally started to fade, but neither of us reached for theckies. I watched him fall asleep in Thessie beside me, his face peaceful in Thetum light. And I sat there for a long time, staring out at the misty road heart, full of questions I didn't have answers to. And what he said with saw in me, I couldn't forget it. Not then, not ever. The morning light came pale and slow, like it didn't want to disturb us. I drifted off Samedamiran 4, head leaning against. The window, arms crossed tight across my zest. My neck ached from the awkward position, and the cold had crept into my knees and shoulders. But still, there was something strangely comforting about waking up there next to him. Richard was still asleep when I opened my eyes, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, mouth slightly open. Lashes dark against his cheekbones. For a split second, I just watched him, the way a mother might watch a child sleeping. Only this was not motherly. Not quite. It was something else, something more. Complicated. I shook the thought out of my head. We were family, even if by law and not blood. Even if we barely knew each other. Even if he saw me as more than thought. I couldn't let it go further. I wouldn't. Still, didn't wake him right away. Instead, I cracked open the door, letting in the crisp smell of rain-soaked trees and pavement. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt fresh and untouched. It was the kind of quiet that feels like a second chance or a warning. He stirred behind me and groaned softly. Mom, morning. Good morning, I said gently. Stepping out of the car, stretch your legs. We survived the night. He got out, rubbing his eyes, and yawned. His hurt had ridden up a little, revealing the lean line of his torso. I'd looked away too fast, annoyed at myself for noticing. But when he caught me, and he did catch him, he didn't say a word. Smiled that sleepy smile and walked toward the edge of the parking lot, gazing into the trees. It's kind of beautiful out here. Himmermured. Feels like the world pressed pause. I nodded. That's what I like about mornings like this. Everything feels possible again. We stood there in silence for a bit, a comfortable, delicate silence. Then he turned to me. Last night Hester did, then hesitated. Yes, I asked, already bracing for whatever he was about to say. I wasn't lying about you, about how you make me feel. I don't want to pretend I didn't say it just because the sun came up. I felt something tighten in my chest. That mix of flattery and fear. It's the old war between being seen and staying safe. I heard you, I said quietly, and I believe you meant it. But Richard, this is messy. You know that, right? He nodded, stuffing his hands in his jacket pockets. Not trying to mess with your life. Not even sure what you want, really. I just know some things shifted for me, and it feels wrong to pretend otherwise. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This wasn't a game to him. This wasn't a drunken moment or some fleeting fantasy. He was serious, confused, maybe, boots and cheer. We got back in the car and I turned the ignition. The heater kicked in with a low hum. As I drove toward the cabin his friends were staying at, I noticed how often our eyes met in the rear view mirror, like we were both trying to hold on tough closeness we'd found without speaking it aloud. When we arrived, Thekabin was quiet still. Early, I parked and he hesitated before opening the door. "You want to come in for coffee?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I shook back. "It's a long drive." He looked down, fingers fidgeting at the hem of his sleeve. "Will you call me after this? Even if it's just to talk." I nodded. "Yes, I will." He smiled, leaned in, and to my surprise, kissed me on the cheek. Not rushed, not suggestive, just soft, warm, respectful, and more than anything, real. I drove away with my hand resting in the spot where his lips had been, my heart heavier than I expected. The days that followed were strange. Went about my life. Morning walks, calls with Martha, quiet evenings with my teened books. But there was a tension under surface, a hum like something waiting to unfold. And then 5 days later he called. 'Twas late, past 10. I was already in bed, face mask on, reading glasses perched on my nose. "Hey," he said softly. "Hope it's okay. I'm calling." I smiled even though he couldn't see it. Of course, we talked for hours about nothing and everything, childhood memories. Relationships, that parts of ourselves we usually keep hidden. He confessed how lost he felt lately, how disconnected from the people in his life. I admitted how lonely Edie been since my divorce, how aging feels like fading some days, how hard it is to feel desired when the world treats older women like they're invisible. "You're not invisible," he said firmly. "You're stunning. You're wise. You're magnetic." I closed my eyes, let the words sink in. "I don't know what this is," I whispered. "What's happening between us, but I don't want to run from it either." "Then don't," he replied. "Let's just take it one breath at a time." That night, I dreamed of the rain. Off the way he looked at me in that car. Oft. Kiss he placed on my cheek. When I woke up, wasn't scared anymore. I was curious, and that's when I knew something wazeled. To change again, I wasn't sure what I expected when Richard called the next time, but it wasn't this. It had been almost 2 weeks since the night we got stuck together, and though we'd spoken a few to me since, always late and always softly, something about his voice that night was different. Braver, intentional. "I was wondering," he said slowly. "Oh, I'll do. Want to come to the cabin? Just you and me, just for a weekend." No pressure. I sat at my kitchen table, tea cooling between my hands. The silence in my house felt louder than usual, like it was pressing me to answer. To the cabin, I asked more to buy time than anything's. "I know how it sounds," he said, voice a little shaky. "And maybe it's crazy, but I can't stop thinking of Booth that night, how it felt, how you looked at me. I want to know if that means something to you too." I didn't speak. I couldn't, not because I didn't know the answer. I did, but because saying it out loud felt like crossing some invisible line, one I'd spent my whole life staying behind, Aline, between right and almost right, between impulse and intention. And yet that quiet hum inside me, the on that had started the moment hell looked at me in that storm, hadn't faded. It had only grown louder. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll come. Pick me up on Friday." We didn't talk Mac on the drive up, not out of awkwardness, but anticipation. Like both of us knew that something waited for us up there. Some truth we hadn't let ourselves speak yet. Thekabin looked different in the daylight. Peaceful, surrounded by soft hills and bare trees, their branches like open hands reaching for the sky. He carried me back inside and set it gently by Theodore. There were only 2 rooms, a small bedroom and the open kitchen living space. A stone fireplace sat in the center of it all, unlit. "I'll take the couch, of course," he said quickly, almost too quickly. I gave Asmal's smile. "Let's not make this harder than it already is, Richard." He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. The evening passed in slow sips of wine and easy conversation. We cooked together, he chopped while I stirred. Our hands brushed. Once, and Webath paused, letting the moment hang Thor, suspended. By the time we sat down in front of the fire, it was late. The wine had warmed me cheeks, but it wasn't the alcohol making my heart beat faster. It was him. His nearest, the softness in his eyes when he looked at me. You know, he said quietly, poking at the fire, I didn't know if I've ever felt this kind-of connection with anyone. I tilted my head. You're young, there's still time for you. He turned to me. I don't care about time, I care about this. I swallowed hard. We can't ignore how complicated this is. What people would think. What your mother would say. My mother hasn't known my heart in years. He said, not cry, just honestly. But you make me feel seen. You make him feel safe. That word hit deeper than he expected. Safe. It wasn't what I thought I wanted, but maybe after years of holding everything together. The polite smiles, the quiet loneliness, the missed chances, maybe safety was the sexiest thing of all. I reached out, my fingers grazing his. Slowly, he turned his palm up and let our hands join fully. His hand was warm, firm, reassuring, and then gently. He leaned in. The kiss was slow, tender, careful, not a claiming, but a question. And I answered. We didn't rush. There was no desperation. No clumsy urgency, just fizzle discovery of skin and warmth and breath. His lips moved along my jaw and my neck. Like he'd memorized a path he'd never walked before. My hands traced his shoulders, his back, learning him the way you learn a language. One word, one pause, one sayat, a time. It wasn't about lust. It was about recognition, about feeling alive in a body I'd almost forgotten belonged to me. Later, we laid together on the floor by the fire, the flickering light painting soft shadows in the walls. My head rested on his chest, and I could hear his heartbeat steady. Calm, are you okay? I whispered. Yes, I murmured. More than okay. We didn't speak much after that. There was nothing that needed saying. Fingers intertwined. Skin against skin, and the quiet understanding that what had just happened was neither wrong nor reckless. It was honest, raw, and deeply real. The next morning, we moved slower. Gentle smiles, lingering touches, the kind of silence that feels full, no empty. I made coffee while he stood at that away looking out over the hills. I didn't know what this means yet, he said finally. But I know I want to keep figuring it out with you. I looked at them. This man who was once just my sister's boy and now something else entirely. I want that too, I said, feeling throughwards settle into. Place like they belonged. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was awake. Ready? It's strange how a single weekend can pull years of your life into sharp focus. After we left the cabin, Richard drove me home in silence most of the way. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the words we had spoken in that place still hung around us, like a scent of woodsome smoke on our clothes. Heavy, comforting, lingering dot. When we pulled into my driveway, the sky was beginning to blush. With sunset, I felt a familiar knot in my stomach. No regret, but reality. The kind that waits patiently after minutes of joy. Reminding you that life doesn't stay paused forever. He walked him to the door. A porch light flickered on automatically, casting his face in a soft amber glow. Do you want to come in? I asked, already unlocking the door. He smiled. I want to, but I think I shouldn't. Not tonight, I nodded, grateful for his restraint on this understanding. I'll call you tomorrow, he asked. You'd better, I said, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. I watched him walk back to the car, his figure slowly swallowed by the deepening dusk. When the taillights disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch, a while arms crossed against the cooler, wondering how something that felt so sudden could also feel so inevitable. The days that followed were a quiet unraveling of the normal routines I used to cling to. I still made my tea in the morning, still listened to my Mr. podcasts, still kept up with my garden, but my mind wandered now to his voice, His hands, the way he looked at me when thought I wasn't watching. We texted almost every day. Sometimes, silly things, pictures of what we were eating, gore jokes he knew I'd grown at. Other times, longer thoughts, things he said had never told anyone, things I didn't know I still needed to share. It was easy, natural, but not without its weight. One night, I got a call from Martha. Susan. She said sharply, "Did Richard tell you anything about why he's been so distant lately?" I hesitated. Distant? How? He's been distracted. Quiet. He even skipped a family dinner last weekend, said he needed space. He never needed space before. I swallowed. Maybe he's just figuring some things out. She sighed. I know he's always looked up to you. Maybe talk to him. Listens to you. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room staring at nothing. The pressure of secrets is a peculiar thing, not always about guilt, but a booth weight of keeping something sacreding, a world that wouldn't understand. That night, Richard called. I ran into Mum, he said, voice low. She brought Hugh up. I didn't say anything, but I could tell she suspects something. I talked to her too. I admitted she's worried. There was a long pause. Are we doing something wrong? He asked finally. I closed my eyes. No, I said, but that doesn't mean it's easy. 'Twas quiet again then. Do you regret it? The question hit deeper than I expected. It's not because I hadn't asked it of myself, but because I already knew the answer. I regret the timing, I said softly. I regret the world not being more forgiving, but you. What happened between us? No, I don't regret that at all. He exhaled. I needed to hear that the weeks turned into months. We didn't make any grand decisions. We didn single quotes tr. Sometimes he'd come over late. And we'd sit in the backyard with wine and blankets, talking about nothing under stars. Other times he wouldn't call for a few days, giving both of us the space to let this unfold at its own pace. There were moments I questioned everything in the mirror. In the grocery store aisle, listening to Martha leave me voicemails that tiptoed around the subject she didn't want to name, but the truth remained. He saw me not as an aunt, not as a woman, past her prime, but as Suzanne, the full, complex, tender person I am, and in loving him, I began to love myself again. Or maybe first time. One evening, I came home find a small envelope tucked under my front doormat. Inside was a photo taken at the cabin, when I wasn't looking, was laughing, eyes squinting against the sunlight, hair fallen across my cheek. On the back, in his handwriting, were just 5 words. This is how I see you. I pressed